So today I want to go over a pretty strong and incredibly fun speed farming build for the Druid in Diablo 4. Now this is one of those builds that's incredibly fast, but you'll primarily be using in the early to mid game of the end game specifically. And the reason I say that is because currently how I have the build, I can't really farm Torment 10 very well yet, but if you go and min-max this build, because there's a few pieces that I really need big upgrades on, you should be able to do most content on Torment 10. But getting up to that point, say Torment 1 through Torment 8, this build is very, very strong and incredibly fun, and one of the fastest builds in the game in terms of just being able to cover ground incredibly quickly. Now to start off, we really have to go over our set because you really do need the 5 set of these Storm Shepherd sets for this build to actually work. Now you don't necessarily need the 5 set, but you do actually need the 2 set, which actually makes it much easier to gear for because getting the 3 set and 5 set are just big power increases, but they're not 100% necessary for the build to actually work. And if you haven't been getting a lot of charm sets yet, once you get into Torment tiers, like the first couple Torment tiers, you'll see how easy it becomes to get your 5 set because you'll just start getting set charms very easily. But the 2 set of this is Storm skills no longer cost spirit to cast. Casting a Storm skill consumes all available spirit to increase Storm skill damage by 0.5% per spirit consumed up to 75%. Additional bonuses may stack, but do not refresh. Now the most important part about this is that any Storm skill no longer costs spirit. So no matter how much spirit you have, it is always free. Even though this is constantly draining your spirit, every skill is still free if it's a Storm skill. That's a very important part. All of your Storm skills are completely free. And you don't really have to worry about the damage boosting portion of this until you get later on. All you really want is that your Storm skills don't cost any spirit. And once you get more of these to get the 3 set, you get Cyclone Armor for free. It gives you 30% damage reduction and it passively procs when enemies damage you. Now with this, you don't need Cyclone Armor on your bar, which is super nice. You'll also get the passive without it being on the bar. So it's just a massive damage reduction. And then the 5 set, Storm skills have a 20% chance to double cast and a 5% chance to triple cast. And double cast gain 100% additional damage, triple cast gain 300%. So now all of your Storm skills can now just multicast and they get massive damage boosts with that. Now, since we're already here, we should go over the other things I am using. So for your Heraldric Seal, the main thing I'd recommend going for is getting one that has 6 charm slots. This requires it be at least a legendary, and one of the 2 rolls at the bottom has to be an additional charm slot. Now, to just get your 5 set, any legendary will do. Like any other legendary charm will have 5 slots at a baseline, but that 6th one allows you to have a unique charm as well. And then just try to get some roll that's good. Mine's not the best. I have 10% crit, which is pretty decent, but you can also get ones that give you some buff for using the Storm Shepherd set. So try to go for that, but primarily you want 6 charm slots. And there are a bunch of different options for unique charms for your final slot. If you don't have this specific one, just put anything in there that gives you some big damage boost. I'm using the Dirge of Eridai. So Storm skills that you cast grant 1 spirit and give you a multiplicative damage bonus. These bonuses are doubled when damaging a vulnerable enemy, which will be always in this build. So just a big damage boost. And this spirit generation is actually good for getting more out of our 2 set that gives us that damage bonus. So specifically when you get this unique charm, you will actually be getting even more damage bonuses than you realize. Now that brings us into our skill tree to start to tie this all together, because this is quite a unique build in how it works, and that's really what makes it fun. So first off, we are going into Lightning Storm, and the reason for this is because of one of its new variants, Hero of the Storm. Lightning Storm can be toggled passively and travels with you. Lightning Storm deals some amount of base damage and will be maintained as long as you have enough spirit. Cast Lightning Storm again to cancel this effect. So this turns Lightning Storm into a toggle. You toggle this on and it auto casts Lightning Storm, just it follows you instead of casting like in an area. You don't have to keep casting it. It's just a passive, essentially aura that you trigger. Now, since our Storm skills no longer cost spirit because of our set, this will be infinitely dealing damage. It will never go off. You turn it on, and unless you like mount up or something, it will just be on, and it will build up its storm like the skill normally works. So it's incredibly strong and it's pure passive damage, because once you toggle this, you just get to use everything else, and this thing is constantly there striking things. It procs anything else that this would normally proc, so it is very strong. We are going to be going full werewolf, so make sure to choose the Lightning Storm becomes a werewolf skill. For our side upgrades, you could take either of these. The damage bonus one that gives you a 10% damage bonus, 25% of the target is vulnerable. This will always be active on the 25%, so that's good. Or if you want more AoE, you can get additional strikes, so you have additional storm strikes, and each stack of ferocity, which we will always have, will give you even more storm strikes. Now this is better for AoE because of how Lightning Storm works. This isn't better for like single target, and this build is a bit weaker single target, so that's why I'm going damage bonus. But for AoE, additional strikes is better. And then you want minimum strikes, so Lightning Storm always grows from a baseline of 2 strikes, because this will just help it grow much more quickly to start it off and get it going. And neither of these are really that important. If you need like a slight movement speed buff, if you aren't already capped, which will probably not happen, you can go the movement speed one. These ones aren't super important. Now that brings us to our main ability that we are actually pressing and dealing damage with. This is Shred, and this is a really good movement skill, which is another reason in how this build is so fast. And it has good lucky hit chance, which is something we're going to be needing. It is a 3-hit combo attack, so it will also be dealing some pretty decent damage. For the variant, we're turning it into a storm skill, which is super important. It allows us to scale it through a bunch of different methods, and because of our set, it's free. And then this will also be getting a pretty massive damage boost. So now it's just a lightning shred. I think there is some like built-in kind of lightning cleave thing with this, but I'm not 100% certain on that. But you're just going to be spamming this. You're going to be hopping around everywhere and dealing more damage. And again, it's storm, so it's completely free to use. Then for our side upgrades, we're using Berserking. Shred grants Berserking for 1 second up to 4 seconds. So we will always have Berserking, which is a 25% damage increase, 15% movement speed increase. This will just always be active, so we're faster, deal more damage. Then cast speed. Shred's cast speed is increased by 20% just to be able to use more shreds. This is incredibly strong, very good for movement, and pretty good damage. And then we also get things like infinite berserking, very strong. And we are using 3 of these defensives, and there's actually a pretty good reason for it that we'll go over. First off, we are using Earthen Bulwark. Now, we are not having this on our bar. We are upgrading this because we are proccing it through one of our rune sets. So we are putting 1 point into it, and this will just give us a big barrier constantly based upon how we're using it in our rune set. But then our variant is Traventine Bulwark. Earthen Bulwark grants 3 stacks of Resolve. In addition, it summons these tectonic plates that deal some damage around you. The main thing we want this for is Resolve. Resolve increase armor by 25% while active. Taking damage consumes a stack, and you could hold to 8 stacks. So we'll just have 25% increased armor at pretty much all times just from this, which is very good. The bottom upgrade I'm taking is Overpower. Casting Earthen Bulwark grants you 2 stacks of Overpower. Now, Overpower has been changed. This is just a small damage increase. It can be used from some other stuff. I'm primarily just using it for a damage increase. If you want more Overpower, use Unstoppable. You'll basically never be CC'd again. Then our top upgrade, we're going to be using Barrier Duration bonus. The duration is increased to 12 seconds, which is nice, but it'll pretty much always be up. But the base amount of shield we get is now 60% for Earthen Bulwark. It's normally at, I think, like 45%. So this is just a massive increase to the barrier. But you can also use Fortify and Healing. You're fortified 7% per second while it's active, and it will heal you if Earthen Bulwark is fully depleted. This is very defensive as well, and since you're constantly reprocking this will give you a lot of Fortify. This may be something I look more into using with some other changes in the build, but either one of these, very defensive, very good. Then we're using Cyclone Armor. Like I mentioned, you get Cyclone Armor for free. You don't need it on your bar. So you could just go in, put 1 point into this. You get the upgrade, which gives you more damage reduction for free for the versatile. This is the free node. Then the variant we're using is Greater Cyclone Armor. All bonuses and damage from Cyclone Armor increase by 100%. So this is for our passive, because as you can see right here with all the upgrades, I gained almost 70% bonus to all resistances as a passive. This will be up at all times. It is incredibly strong because of our 3 set. And the bottom upgrade gained an additional 20% bonus to all resistances. So just a massive increase to our resistances, and we don't have to have it on our bar. So it's just a few points for massive massive damage reduction. Then for our final defensive, I'm currently using Blood Howl. This is very good because it's just a very big heal on a pretty low cooldown. The top upgrade we're taking is when we use it, we gain 20% dodge for 5 seconds. You're just more tanky. The bottom one we're taking is increased to movement speed. This is multiplicative, so this is a very good movement speed increase. This again will help us be a speed farmer. The variant we're taking is Berserking Howl. It grants us Berserking to us and allies and gives a damage increase. In addition, we'll just be poisoning everything when this is active. This is something I may look into changing up, but the heal has been incredibly nice. And I haven't been playing solo, so giving my party more damage and berserking has been pretty nice, but this may be something I'll be changing out in the future. Now this takes us down to Hurricane. Now this is another one of our abilities that's going to be completely passive and on at all times because of the variant Derecho. So Hurricane has no cooldown and deals 100% bonus damage. Hurricane costs 15 spirit per second while active, and you cast Hurricane to toggle it on and off. And Hurricane is a core skill. Now this is also a storm skill, so it's completely free, so the spirit cost per second doesn't matter to us. Now we just have Hurricane active on us 100% of the time. We turn it on once, just like Lightning Storm, and it's just a passive effect around us, which is pretty cool. Now it does a decent bit of damage. It's not like one of our main damaging abilities or anything, but it's up 100% of the time, so it's just some decent-ish more free damage, but we are using it for some of its other effects, primarily weaken. So now enemies hit by Hurricane are weakened, which means they deal reduced damage. So it's 20% for normal, 15% for elites, 10% for bosses. They just deal that much less damage, and this will weaken everything instantly. Then the top node, we're just taking more crit chance for it, and even more for more ferocity stacks, so Hurricane will just be critting even more. You can also take move speed. This gives you a good move speed increase if you're not capped or close to capped. That'll just be up all the time, so that's also quite good. Then we have Trample, which we're primarily using for movement, because if you take Trample and use the werewolf version of it, Trample now becomes a leap through the air, kind of like the Barbarian Leap. It's super good. You can leap through walls. It has a super far distance, feels very good to use. And then a top upgrade we're taking is it makes us unstoppable for the duration, so it's an unstoppable when we need it. And then cooldown reduction reduces cooldown by 6 seconds, so we can just use it more and more. Then the upgrade we're taking is Extenuation. You just have a chance to execute enemies. It does some damage. The damage isn't really consequential, and it heals you when you hit enemies, and that's really why we're taking it. The damage of the other ones isn't that big either way, so we're primarily using it for that heal, and then you can execute some enemies sometimes. This is primarily for movement. This jump is so incredibly strong. And then finally, we have our ultimate, which deals a lot of damage. We're using Cataclysm. And as we get into some of the upgrades, you'll see why this thing is so crazy. The top upgrade increases its duration to 4 seconds, which is just incredibly strong. The bottom upgrade, enemies hit by Cataclysm are vulnerable. This is one of the really important parts. We have a bunch of stuff that works off vulnerable. Vulnerable enemies just take more damage at a baseline, but we have a bunch of stuff that stacks on top of that, and everything will always be vulnerable because we'll always have Cataclysm up. It is incredibly strong, and because of our variant, it does a lot of damage. Also, make sure to make it a werewolf skill, but the variant is Severe Storm. Cataclysm spawns double the twisters and lightning bolts. In addition, lightning bolt strikes have a 20% chance to spawn some amount of dancing bolts that actually deal a lot of damage. So this kind of doubles the damage of this because everything it does is basically just doubled, and now it even spawns lightning bolts. So the damage of this skill with everything we have built into it is massive, and Cataclysm will just be killing stuff off screen at all times. So this just ties everything together, and we are using some other stuff to reduce the cooldown so we can stay in this 100% of the time. Just incredibly strong, everything vulnerable, tons and tons of damage. And then we have our Paragon boards, and I will probably be redoing this, but these are generally what it's going to be. The first board, we're taking Spirit for an increase to critical strike chance. The secondary, enemies take more damage from you after you crit them. The legendary is increased critical strike damage. The first board we are taking is going to be Thunderstruck. Storm skills deal increased damage and have increased crit strike chance. The glyph we're taking is Earth and Sky, bonus to magic nodes within range. The secondary, nature skills deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies. The legendary is increased nature magic damage. Then we're going over to the right. We're taking the Ancestral Guidance board. After spending 75 spirit, you deal increased damage, and your ultimate skills do increased damage per spirit when cast. So our ultimate will deal more damage. This will just be procced at all times for more damage as well. The glyph we're taking is Electrocution, increased lightning bolts and dancing bolt damage. The secondary is enemies damaged by lightning bolts or dancing bolts take increased damage. The legendary is increased lightning damage. Then the next board is going to be Lust for Carnage. Critical strikes with werewolf skills restore 2 spirit and deal massively increased damage. The restore 2 spirit is actually quite good because as mentioned, the more and more we drain our spirit, the more damage we get from our stat bonus. The glyph we're taking is Headhunter, a bonus to normal nodes within range. The secondary is increased damage to elites. The legendary is increased damage. Then the final board we're taking is Constricting Tendrils, increased damage to poison enemies, and a lucky hit to poison enemies. This should be up majority of the time and just a decent damage increase. The glyph we're taking is Fulminate, increased to our lightning damage. The secondary is increased lightning damage to healthy and injured enemies. The legendary is increased lightning damage. And then the spirit boons we're going to be taking is Wariness to take reduced damage from elites. I'm still using Sight Talents for the increased critical strike chance, and then the lucky hit chance is actually nice for some other effects. If you don't need the crit, you can go into something else. All of these are actually quite good. The max life increase is really good for defensives. The attack speed is actually quite good for our shred, and then Avian Wraith for increased critical strike damage. Then we're taking Calamity, extend the duration of our ultimate, so our Cataclysm, which we want up at all times. Then a combo for the Storm, which is a lucky hit to reduce the cooldown of our ultimate. This helps us get back into Cataclysm and have it up almost 100% of the time. And then for Mercenaries, I'm just going to be using Subo as my main mercenary, primarily for the tracking. He just passively tracks everything in a new minimap. It's super nice. But then we're going down primarily to take Opening Fire. Enemies hit by Subo's cover fire takes 25% increased critical strike damage from you, which is a pretty nice damage increase. The secondary, I'm just using Oldkin with Fields of Languish. He makes enemies deal less damage when he uses it, and I just put it on Shred. You can also use Rahir or anything else to proc defensives for you or anything like that. Your Mercenaries aren't super important, and you can really change them up to whatever you like to use. And then that finally brings us to our gear. Now, there really isn't any gear that is specifically needed, like any uniques or mythics or anything like that. These will just buff up your damage even more. Now, starting with our mythics and our uniques, I'm using the Air Perdition for a mythic. This is just a massive damage increase. The stats on it are good, and then the multiplicative damage is crazy. Always good. If you can't get it, you can just use a pretty defensively rolled helmet with pretty much any defensive legendary aspect on it. It's going to be good. The other uniques we're using aren't required, but do help the build deal more damage. For gloves, we're using the Unsung Wraps, which Lightning Storm gains 1 additional strike each time it grows and deals more damage. So our just passive damage of Lightning Strike gets even better. And then for our weapon, I'm using Waxing Gibbous. Shred deals more damage and has a 25% chance to land up to 4 additional strikes. So this is essentially just landing more shreds when you do it. And because we're always spamming Shred, having Shred deal a lot more damage is always going to be really good. But then that brings us into our legendary aspects. On our necklace, casting an ultimate skill increases your damage by up to 80% for 8 seconds and gain 2 additional ultimate ranks, just more and more Cataclysm damage. Then we have 3 offensive aspects. We have, while fortified, you deal more damage. You have a few ways to get Fortify, and the main one I'm currently using is one of our legendary aspects, but you can also use the Earthen Bulwark passive we went over. That will just fortify you at all times. Then we have deal increased damage while you have a barrier active. Because we're going to be proccing Earthen Bulwark at all times, this will just give us another big damage increase. And then finally, lightning damage is up to a 15% chance to echo some percent of its damage to up to 2 close enemies. These echoes repeat on isolated targets. So this is essentially another lucky hit to kind of just cast another chain lightning that just echoes your damage on targets, and this works on bosses because it'll just repeat on that boss. So just some additional lightning damage there. Then for our final 3 aspects, so first we have our Fortify generator, which if you're using the upgrade for Earthen Bulwark that generates you Fortify, you don't need this. You can change this to another defensive aspect, but this gains up to 6% of your max life as Fortify whenever you deal direct damage with Berserking. As I mentioned, anytime we shred something, we gain Berserking. So this will just give us Fortify pretty consistently. Then on our legs, we gain up to 30% damage reduction while in Werewolf, just DR at all times. Then on our boots, lightning damage is up to a 30% chance to stun enemies for 1.5 seconds. This is super nice because this will also help us stun bosses. Because we're hitting so quickly, we have so many different damage types of lightning going out, this will stun bosses pretty quickly, and ceasing anything you're fighting is just always really, really good. And then for our gems, on your weapons, whether you're using a one-hander or two-hander, you want lightning damage multiplier. On your jewelry, you can really use whatever defensive you want. I'm just using resist to all elements. It's much easier that way. In one piece of our armor, you're using willpower. Then in your other 2, we're going to be using rune sets. We're using Pak Gar, which spend 25% of your maximum resource, which will just gain us up to 10% crit chance. Crit chance is actually much harder to come by, so getting that is very nice. And also, because our spirit is always used instantly, this will always be capped. If you toggle on your Lightning Storm and your Hurricane, this will be procced 100% of the time. Then our other rune set is cast 2 mobility or Macop skills, and this will give us our our Earthen Bulwark if you do that 3 times. And this Earthen Bulwark is just our Earthen Bulwark, so the upgrades you put on it are the upgrades you're going to get on this. Now what's really nice is that Shred is a mobility skill, so you just spam Shred, it will spam apply Earthen Bulwark to you, which will get its upgrades, so that's just incredibly strong. Tons of defensives, tons of other effects you proc off it, like we get Resolve. If you go the Fortify route, this will just give you all of your Fortify as well, so ridiculously strong for any build using Shred. But that is the entirety of this speed farming Druid build. It is incredibly fun. You just toggle on your Lightning Storm, you toggle on Hurricane, you use your Cataclysm on cooldown, and then you just run around spamming Shred on enemies. You use Bloodhowl to heal and to get the other buffs, and then you use Trample whenever you want to just leap around. Incredibly fun build, but that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.